This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker. Well, this week we're going to ask our panel to provide comparisons and contrasts between the Democratic and Republican conventions that have been held. We'll discuss the NBA's decision to pull the All-Star game from our state, and we'll ask how recent voter ID rulings in Texas and Wisconsin might affect our elections. And of course, as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. So let's get started. This past week, Democrats held their convention in Philadelphia. We want our panel to compare and contrast the two conventions and give you their takeaways. Dennis, Hillary Clinton chose former Virginia Governor and current Senator Tim Kaine to be her running mate. We said last week North Carolina is a state that's in play. Did Kaine help or hurt Democrats' chances in our state?
Well, Tom, I'm one of those that still believes that when a typical voter goes into the voting booth, they really don't think about who's running for vice president. They just vote for who's running for president. So, you know, Tim Kaine is a solid guy. He has a solid record as a public servant, serving local and state and federal offices. He has an accomplished family. He had a good record as governor of the state of Virginia. So I think that it doesn't hurt to have him on the ticket. He certainly has a kindred spirit to North Carolina, being just north of us from Virginia. So it was a safe choice, and I think, does he help? You know, maybe a teeny bit, but he certainly doesn't hurt like maybe some other vice president nominees and candidates have been in the past.
I want to talk more about the Democratic convention, but I want to talk to former Republican Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr. Bob, I got to ask you about your treatment at the Republican convention last week. After you said you thought Donald Trump would be dangerous as president, you were told you were no longer a Republican and left the convention. I want to get your reaction to all of that.
Well, I'm still a Republican and have been for a long time. It was distressing in a lot of ways, but my mistake was when I said that Trump was dangerous and that I wouldn't support him. I should have just quoted one of John Hood's columns, and maybe that would have got me off the hook. But
that is always a good policy.
It is always a good policy. But yeah, you would think that the party would be a little more inclusive among those of us who have labored in the party for years and years instead of saying you need to go home.
Well, and you would think the tent would be big enough, but I think it shows something about what's going on in the GOP. Would you agree?
I would, and there's an interesting letter that George Romney sent to Barry Goldwater after the 64 election, in which he talked about the party shouldn't be ideological opposites. There should be a range within each party, but unfortunately that's not the case.
John, unlike the Republican convention, the Democrats had a star-studded list of speakers, including Michelle Obama, Madeleine Albright, and what I thought was a very unique speech by Bill Clinton on Tuesday night. What impact, if any, did this cast have so far as the Democrats were concerned on the convention?
Well, the Democrats could not maintain the standard that the Republicans had set because I don't believe that Bill and Hillary Clinton own a winery or a casino or any other business where they could trot out somebody to speak about their business, except their foundation, which turns out to be a gigantic, global, sprawling lobbying business. But what I would say about both conventions is there were obviously disruptions at the beginning in both cases. There was a lot of drama, and that was good for interest. The Republican convention gave Donald Trump the standard sort of average 3 or 4 point bounce out of the convention. We'll have to see if the Democratic convention does the same thing for Hillary Clinton. But in a way, all the drama and the disagreements and the Bernie reaction at the beginning of the Democratic convention, all of that might ultimately help Clinton if it just gets more people. If it got more people to watch, and then people come home as some of the Republicans did for Trump.
Chris, one of the things I found interesting was, remember back many years ago under what was called the Hunt Commission, we created this system, the Democratic Party created this system of so-called superdelegates.
Right.
Now there seems to be a movement to either greatly curtail or eliminate superdelegates from the Democratic convention. You think that's a wise idea?
Well, I think the perception is in many ways correct, that it takes power away from the voters who elect delegates to have these hand-picked, very influential people who can sort of do what they want as a convention, as an insurance policy for the folks who are really running the party. And to the extent that both parties are becoming more populist in nature, I think you'll probably see that taper off as we go through the years. I want to just chime in a little bit about the difference in the two conventions. It was really interesting to me that the Republican convention, John mentioned it, had people from Trump's business there. There was a weird anger, I thought, pervading the whole thing. You would have thought that this is the worst country in the world, almost, if you watch it. The irony to me is that Mike Pence, Trump's running mate, and a lot of other Republican Governor McCrory are all bragging about how well things are going in their states. A lot of Democratic governors are bragging about how well things are going in their states. Well, those two things can't be true, that things are going well in most states and everything's horrible in the country, which is what we heard, I think, in the Republican convention. So there's so many messages, but my last point would be nobody's going to remember virtually any of this in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, with some exception, I think, of the Republican Party being still not united and Ted Cruz being the biggest example.
Dennis, I was going to ask you about this. We've heard so much talk about party unity. Which party at this point looks like it's more united, Republicans or Democrats?
Well, of course, it's a little early to know that. I think there's a big gap of voters that are undecided out there. We just don't know where they're going to cut and go. It looks to me, though, from the optics of it, Tom, when you look at the conventions, you got the sense that, the Democrats seem to be a little more united and together than maybe perhaps the Republicans were. But it could have been just the tenor of the convention. They were both a little different in terms of their approaches to their nominating their candidates.
Tom, if you look at the polls after the Republican convention, as I alluded to earlier, some percentage points of Republicans who had previously withheld their support for Trump came home to him. That's why his numbers went up. But it's still lower than, for example, Mitt Romney had in 2012 or John McCain had in 2008. Really, most Republicans end up at a higher percentage of support among Republicans than Trump still has. And most Democrats have had a higher percentage of support from Democrats than Hillary Clinton. So both parties are still split.
And it's worth knowing, when's the last time the chief rival, Ted Cruz, refused to endorse the Democrat, his own nominee of the party? It's been quite a while. Whatever you can say about Bernie Sanders, he did strongly endorse Hillary Clinton. And that's the norm at a convention, not to withhold that endorsement.
Yeah, Bob, here in North Carolina, the National VFW Convention was held this past week, and Trump and Clinton both spoke. Trump got just overwhelming response. Clinton sort of tepid response. Why?
Well, I think perhaps it's a demographic of who's at the VFW convention, an older male individuals who perhaps are uncomfortable with Hillary Clinton for a variety of ways. They like Trump's sort of bombastic, we're going to make America strong again. So it wasn't too surprising.
All right, I want to go around the table very quickly and ask everybody, what was your takeaway from the Philadelphia Convention? Dennis?
Well, my takeaway was that it's united and they're ready to go, and I think they'll energize the base.
John?
Michelle Obama has always been an effective, I don't agree with her very much, but she's always been an effective speaker, and she did a good job selling Hillary Clinton to a somewhat skeptical audience.
Chris?
I agree with that. I also think that the Democratic convention looked like it was run by grown-ups. Their speeches weren't plagiarized. They weren't lower echelon business people speaking.
I knew plagiarism was going to come in here.
The first they denied it all, and then they ended up admitting it, and that I thought that marred the Republican convention. And as John mentioned, we had people working for various industries of Trump there as a commercial. It looked like it was run by Donald Trump instead of a professional political organization.
As a former Republican, what was your take?
Now, I object to that. I thought the Democrats did a nice job taking a more positive approach to America and where the country needs to go, as opposed to the sort of fear-mongering and antagonism that Trump evidenced.
You know we're joking about that, of course.
Well, of course.
We thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or on Twitter @NC Spin Tweets. After we come back from these messages, we're going to talk about the NBA pulling the All-Star game from North Carolina.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
After repeated threats, the NBA officially announced that the 2017 All-Star Game would not be held in Charlotte because of House Bill 2. Reactions on both sides of this controversial issue came quickly. Governor Pat McCrory said it was more politically correct BS. Attorney General Roy Cooper was quick to point out that it would cost Charlotte as much as $100 million in lost revenues, and demonstrated the failed policies of Republicans. John, you wrote a column in which you said the Democrats were going to campaign on HB 2 all the time, thinking it would determine the outcome of the elections, but you went on to say they were wrong. Explain.
Well, they're wrong because they do not agree with me on this subject. I think that would be sort of self-evident. What I mean by this is simply that, of course, there are strong opinions about HB 2. There are strong passions ginned up by HB 2. But most of the people who think that that's a top priority issue were already going to vote against or for Pat McCrory for other reasons. So people who are undecided, people who weren't sure, soft Republicans, soft Democrats, unaffiliated voters that are really swing voters, I do not personally believe, and I don't think the polls would suggest, that HB 2 is likely to be a voting issue for them. They're looking at the economy. They would look at education. I'm not saying all the issues that they're interested in unambiguously point towards McCrory's reelection. I just don't think that HB 2 is likely to tip the balance. And those kinds of issues typically don't tip gubernatorial.
All right, I want to ask the two lawyers on our panel. U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Schroeder announced he's going to hear arguments about staying the bill next Monday. And then he's going to try the case challenging the law November 14th after the election. What's your best judgment about getting a stay on the implementation of the law and possibly the outcome? Bob, I'll start with you.
I have no earthly idea. I
That's
think
the best answer and the shortest one you've ever given.
But I have to say the issue is not HB 2. At least from the Democrat perspective, they're going to be hammering this loss of business. And while I tend to agree with John that nobody is really that concerned about the bathroom issue, I do think people are concerned about losing conventions, losing all-star games and the like, and that's going to be the issue that the Republicans get pounded with.
Dennis, your reaction?
Well, you know, to answer the question, I think the Fourth Circuit decision on that Richmond case, I would tend to think that there's a chance that there might be a stay entered in this case. But I want to tell you, I agree with Justice on this thing. I told this panel on the show a while back that this has morphed away from being a social and a moral issue to an economic development issue. And I don't think that the Democrats are going to just stay on this issue as a winner for the election. I think you're right. I don't think that's going to tip one way or the other. Like they do everything, they're going to poll it. And when they do and they see where it goes, they're going to decide how they use that.
Chris, during the last week's convention, HB 2 was the topic of several speakers, particularly Jesse Lipson, entrepreneur, said the bill was driving away business and nothing scares investment like hate. He further went on to say that Republicans think they may be telling people where to go to the bathroom, but they're actually telling people which markets to stay out of. Comment on his remarks.
Well, I think what he's talking about is the climate that people perceive is happening in North Carolina. There was an international newspaper a couple months ago that had a story about discrimination in America, and it focused on Mississippi and North Carolina because of HB2. Now, you can think it's wrong, you can think it's right, but that's the perception that is out there now, and I think a lot of people that travel around the country will tell you people will ask questions about HB2. I was a little, not really, but a tiny bit surprised at the outrage from people about the NBA. The NBA, all they did was follow through with what they said they were going to do. They said in April, if you don't significantly change this law, we're going to move the All-Star game. They said that. They didn't significantly change the law. They moved the All-Star game.
Bob, you filed a complaint about an ad that the state of New York had run about HB2, touting industry and urging them to move to North Carolina. You said that it was interfering with the electoral process here in North Carolina. Explain that.
Well, it was an economic development pitch from New York saying, we're great, we do all these things right for equality, and then taking a veiled shot politically at North Carolina generally in the leadership, not directly focused on HB2. Now, I think that's wrong from a public policy standpoint. They're using New York taxpayer money to meddle in North Carolina politics. And that's why I filed the ethics complaint, because I think that's an improper use of out-of-state money. And, New York just needs to keep its nose out of our business.
You don't think anything's going to happen from it?
Yeah, I think they pulled the ad right after I filed the complaint.
What's the difference if North Carolina, let's assume North Carolina raised taxes in some year, Republicans didn't like it, and another state another state raised taxes, and North Carolina's Department of Commerce put an ad up and billboard in the state saying, we have lower corporate taxes, come to North Carolina. Is that the same thing?
Well, personally, yes. I mean, I've been against economic development incentives and this let's steal businesses from one state or one community.
Wrong illustration, Chris.
I'm against it.
It's not about incentives, it's about messaging. Can you use taxpayer money to argue that your state is a more attractive place to do business than another state?
States do that all the time.
Well, do they specifically name states?
Sure, of course they do.
Do they?
Well, and it's my understanding
in elections
that they had two ads. One they were running in New York had two ads. One they were running in a number of other states, and then this one particular one focused on North Carolina and this sort of veiled legislative controversy. The press has made it a bigger deal than I think it is.
But all of this points to the point we're making, that this is not a moral social issue anymore. It's an economic development issue. States are very competitive for business. New York saw a way to drive a wedge. They took it. It was very aggressive. And of course, we'll see if it works. But I will tell you, it's hurting economic development in North Carolina.
Well, and John, we still haven't, North Carolina and 24 other states still have the lawsuits against the federal government regarding the whole issue of discrimination. If we want to get back to that.
Well, it's really
Where does
about,
that stand?
no, it's about access to showers and locker rooms in public facilities like high schools. That's what the dispute's about. The Justice Department has invented a rule that no Congress has ever adopted, that the Justice Department, no federal agency has ever put through the rulemaking process. They have invented a regulation and basically foisted it on all the rest of the country, and a lot of the country has rebelled and said that's not a rule that any Democratic official any Democratic process has ever yielded, and we don't think it's the law of the land. That's the dispute.
But remember, I just want to quickly, North Carolina went way further in its non-discrimination standard than virtually every other state. It wrote biological sex into the law, not sex. Only a couple states do that, I think Mississippi and one other. So HB2 is not just about bathrooms, and that's the problem.
All right, after these messages, we're going to talk about voter ID and other court issues.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
You only get one pair of eyes. Keeping them healthy is critical to your quality of life. Members of the NC Optometric Society know this. These highly skilled doctors have the latest technology and the medical training to care for your eyes and the eyes of those you love. Make sure you visit your optometrist for an eye exam on a regular basis. For more information on keeping your eyes healthy or to find the right optometrist for you, visit nceyes.org. Remember, healthy eyes, healthier lives.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception. keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
Over 30 states have some form of requirement for showing identification at the ballot box, but 9 states, including North Carolina, are deemed to have more restrictive laws. A New Orleans-based federal court of appeals just ruled that Texas's ID law was too restrictive shortly after a similar federal court ruling in Wisconsin. Bob, the big question on everybody's mind is where this leaves North Carolina's ID law and how might it affect November's elections? What do you think?
Well, there's uncertainty. The Texas law was more restrictive than North Carolina, and the State Board of Elections has done an excellent job in trying to implement the law, but it's in the Fourth Circuit. They're reviewing Judge Schrader's order upholding the constitutionality of it. There's a trial in state court on the state constitutional issue. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's the problem with elections. If we go down and have as tight an election, say for governor or maybe even for president, we got an issue.
All right, I want to move over. In addition, anybody else got a comment on that? Because I want to move to another issue.
Very quickly, the 2 court decisions you mentioned both reference North Carolina as an example of a law that had appropriate exceptions for people that didn't have the driver's licenses. I don't think this necessarily suggests that our law is in trouble. I don't know, but I don't think so.
All right, while we're talking about the courts, the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals said last week they're not going to hold a full court hearing on the Wake County redistricting case. Chris, what do you think that means so far as what's going to happen here?
Well, that means like we've said on this show before, that means we have several options. One is to hold the elections under the maps that the legislature drew, which have been found unconstitutional. I think that's the least likely scenario. We could hold the elections under the maps that were in place before the General Assembly redrew them, which were drawn in 2011, by the way, by Republicans who controlled the school board at that point. Or we could put off the election another year until somebody draws some new maps. And I don't know of those 3 what's going to happen.
Dennis, what's your leaning on that as far as what might happen there?
My leaning is it's a big mess. I mean, it really is. And
that's the quote of the show, by the way.
Well, but the fact of the matter is, I think they have options. It seems to me this is a hot potato nobody wants to catch.
What do you think, Bob?
I've heard Judge Dever may end up drawing the maps, the federal district court judge.
Well, that would be something, wouldn't it?
But it would have to be done quickly in order to have an election in them this year.
And speaking of quickly, after these quick messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
It's a fact, patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Recently, when I attended the service for Senator Robert Morgan down in Harnett County, several people came up to me and said their favorite part of the show was when we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know. So I'm going to go around the horn and ask everybody to tell us something we don't know. Chris, we'll start with you.
Well, I think one of the least discussed aspects of the school voucher program or opportunity scholarships is discrimination that's happening at some of these schools. I just happen to be looking at some of these schools that are getting the voucher money. There's a school in Matthews, a Christian school, that got over $100,000 of state money that has an explicit policy that does not allow gay students or students with gay parents to attend the school. Well, those parents and those students are paying taxes in North Carolina, giving that school more than $100,000, and they are forbidden from even applying to attend that school. I think it raises a lot of issues, and I'm not sure people realize how unaccountable our voucher system is.
I think we call that the Lawyer Full Protection Act, Full Employment Act. Bob Orr, tell us something we don't know.
When the legislature redrew the congressional districts, they made a point of saying, we're not considering race, this is purely for partisan advantage. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court historically has said drawing districts for partisan advantage is okay. Anticipate litigation on that very issue with the hope that it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court and gives them a chance to reverse that.
Interesting. Dennis Wicker, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, most people don't know that North Carolina did not participate in the first presidential election. Why? Because we had not adopted the Bill of Rights.
And ratified it.
And ratified it. So we did not participate, and that's been in our history since the beginning of this country's time. The governor of the state of North Carolina didn't have the veto until it was one of the last states, if not the last state to do it. And we, of course, disperse power because we elect our Secretary of State and our Secretary of Agriculture. So it's in our DNA and in our history.
All right, very good. John, tell us something we don't know.
The Kauffman Foundation just put out its latest index of entrepreneurial activity. They looked at the 25 most populous states. North Carolina is now 8th, went up 7 ranks from last year's the largest gain in the country. But we still have a long way to go to encourage the kind of business starts that will propel economic growth into the future.
Did Kauffman say why we jumped so high?
We jumped so high because we have a higher number of people starting companies, and particularly companies are growing faster after they start. That's what this index was examining.
So that's saying that once a company starts up here,
it's a higher rate of growth than most other states.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.